I remember once as a teenager, I went on a cross-country trip from Idaho to Minnesota with two of my aunts and all of their children, about 10 kids in total. We were all loaded into one of those extra big travel vans. I was strategically placed in the middle of the van to help take care of the smaller children. In the very back, my two cousins started screaming, so I unbuckled and went back there to ask what was wrong. One cousin, Kendall, was bawling that David was kicking him. I said, "David, stop kicking him. Why are you kicking him?" He said, "'Cause there's nothing else to do." He was right. Back then, boredom was the instigator of many road trip behavior problems, 'cause there really was nothing else to do. Eventually, some smart person started putting screens in minivans so you could watch a movie. And now, of course, each child has their own iPad, so staying buckled in place no longer presents the same battle with boredom that we were subject to on a long car trip. School, on the other hand, doesn't allow kids to bring their iPads, so sometimes kids don't know how to handle boredom in the classroom. Hello, I'm your host, Miriam Brown. In addition to my teaching certificate, I have a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's in curriculum and instruction. I spent the last decade as a public school teacher, and I want to give you insider tips on how to help your child do well in a system that might otherwise fail them. Today, let's focus on helping your child to learn how to handle being bored appropriately. One of the most difficult things about school is that it's boring for a lot of kids. I was the gifted and talented facilitator in our district for many years, working with the most advanced students. And a lot of parents would call me and say, "I think my child is gifted because they're really bored at school." That's true that sometimes boredom can be a symptom of being gifted, but sometimes it's just a symptom of school. I mean, think about it. You have 25 or more kids in the classroom and only one teacher. They have a list of things that the kids should learn in that grade, but more than half of the kids are so far behind that it's impossible to teach them the grade level standards. Then they always have a few that are 2 or 3 grades ahead and already know everything you're trying to teach. With only 45 minutes a day to prepare all of your lessons, it's impossible for the teacher to meet everyone's needs. The best they can do is just kind of teach slightly below what they're supposed to be teaching and try to help the most amount of kids. Honestly, that's why I don't recommend teaching your child to write their letters and numbers. They need something to learn in kindergarten so they don't get bored. I don't really think 9 months of kindergarten is enough for them to gain an understanding of the sounds of the letters or the quantities that the numbers represent, but it's plenty of time for them to learn to write the letters and numbers, because if they already know everything, it may lead to some behavior problems. So let's talk about boredom. Boredom is an uncomfortable but very normal emotion. It often emerges when we're doing something we don't find meaningful or when it's too hard or too easy. That horrible feeling of boredom urges us to change something about our situation. I've seen a lot of articles about how boredom is good for children, but I don't think they quite explain the whole picture. Sometimes, when kids are allowed to experience boredom, it encourages them to be creative and use their imaginations. However, sometimes it also encourages behaviors that are not very nice. Like my cousin, who decided to kick his brother to pass the time. In fact, research shows that people who are easily bored are much more likely to do drugs, gamble, and engage in other addictive behaviors to get rid of that feeling. So it's not so much that boredom is good or bad, but that our response to boredom can either be helpful or hurtful. So this episode is about helping our children learn positive ways to deal with their boredom. I think teaching boredom tolerance today is harder than ever because we have electronic devices that can quickly and easily get rid of it. I'm not against using devices, but we need to weigh the pros and cons. Here's a clip of the conversation that I had with my friend Elizabeth as she weighed the decision of whether or not to get Javi an iPad.
I thought you weren't supposed to give kids tablets or computer electronics, and that was bad. And so Javi never played a tablet game. he had seen maybe a movie in the car on a tablet and held that on long car rides. But when he went in for his kindergarten assessment, he didn't even know how to work a tablet. And so I think that that is something that maybe parents know that they should let their kids have tablets before kindergarten, but I didn't know. And I think it hurt him.
That is really interesting. I hadn't even considered that before because you get mom shamed on the internet for letting your kids have devices. And yet, when they go to kindergarten, they're all of a sudden expected to know how to use it. But if they don't have any experience with it, you're right. That's really going to be confusing.
Yeah, and I think Javi struggled with it a lot in the beginning because the teachers would say he would just touch on the screen and didn't know where to push and wasn't understanding how the interactive games were working. And the interactive games are actually the testing that they're using. So he still doesn't have a tablet, so I still don't know what we could do at home to help him learn to play games. And when he has played on my cell phone, he's just not that kid that's going to sit and watch TV and play video games all day. He'd rather be out doing something. So I don't know how to help him on that either.
Yeah, it's more important that he understands the concepts and to leave the computer stuff to the school to figure it out. It would probably be okay to let him play the iStation games at home if you wanted. But I still think that the parent's job at home is more to learn with the kid through conversations and through helping them understand how the math and the reading intersects with their real life, and to leave the computer stuff to the school. That's their job.
I'm not going to get him a tablet then and blame it on you.
It's all my fault. So getting your child an iPad might help them prepare for school testing. And honestly, I think it can be a useful tool for parents as well. My older kids didn't have iPads, but they did have screen time in the form of video games and television. I only let them use their screen time when I needed to take a nap because I was sure that they would be glued to the screen and not get into any trouble. Now that I'm older and have chronic fatigue from various health issues, I doubt that I could even survive without Yogi having at least some screen time. However, as necessary as screen time might be for my health, it might also have other consequences for Yogi. The National Institute of Health did a review of research and found overwhelming evidence that there is correlation between screen time and attention span. I also think one thing to consider is that using screens does not really help them learn how to manage their boredom appropriately. When Yogi came to us 2 years ago, he was used to having unlimited screen time. He was probably watching 8 to 10 hours a day, but he was using his iPad as a coping mechanism. When my sister died, he was staying at my house, and I came into his room and found him laying on the floor, staring at the ceiling. I asked him if he was okay, and he said, "Everything is boring." I think he was experiencing deep sadness and loss, but he described it as boredom. It was a great lesson for me about how serious the feeling of boredom is for kids. So the first year, I didn't take away his iPad. I did block it so that it shut off at night because it was ruining his sleep schedule. I just tried to coax him away with fun activities instead. But this year, he's doing better, and I've cut back to a 2-hour limit, which really is the very maximum that pediatricians recommend. And to be honest, it's been painful for both of us. There are a lot of factors that go into determining how much screen time you give your child. And I'm not going to cast shade on anyone. It's a very personal decision, and every family is going to choose different amounts of screen times that work for them. But if you want your child to start using their device less, here are some tips. Number 1, talk to your child about why doctors say not to have too much screen time. You can tell them that your body doesn't move enough when you're on screen, and iPads can change your brain and make it harder to learn in real life. I also think it's a good idea to make the device itself be the bad guy so that you don't have to remember to physically monitor their screen time. When my older kids were at home, we used an app called Screen Time from Screen Time Labs. It allowed me to block their devices remotely. I liked that I could give them 30 minutes a day, and if they wanted more, they could earn it by doing chores. Now my kids have Apple devices, so I just use the settings to do all of the things that Screen Time used to do. I found that Apple doesn't really play well with child monitoring apps, and it just got too frustrating. It's also important to set up a schedule so kids can predict when they will be allowed to use their iPads or the television. Kids live in such an uncontrollable world because adults dictate everything about their lives. so it's easier for them when they can at least predict what's going to happen. Sometimes it's good to let your child make some of the choices. For example, Yogi decided he would rather have a little bit more game time and give up mindlessly watching YouTube. We made an exception for tutorials, though. You can learn so much watching people explain how to do things on YouTube. I consider it an important modern resource. In fact, if you don't know how to put time limits on your child's device, I recommend searching for a good YouTube tutorial. You can pause it and rewind it so you don't miss anything. Anyway, the time is growing long, so I'm going to break this episode up. Don't worry, the second half is available right now. I'll be talking about how to teach your child how to fill those boring times without an electronic device. Talk to you soon.